Ding Dong Dead, or as we like to call it, the kind of triple D we weren't expecting, is a very short 2023 low-poly slasher horror game developed by Jordan King and published by Torture Star that revolves around the player, and yes, they're just called the player on the wiki, trying their best to babysit an insanely annoying little kid, inviting their friends Hipji and Hillary, and building up their skills to make the game easier for them. This game brings a lot to the table in terms of its atmosphere, humor, charm, and Halloween feel, but in terms of gameplay and efficient mechanics that actually build towards a climactic fight, falls a light year short. It definitely delivers on personality and culture, but the portions of the game where it actually feels like you're playing a riveting interactive video experience are infinitesimally short. 5.5 broken doorbells out of 10. Early on, the game introduces you to the 5 stats which are displayed at the bottom left of the screen and represented by numbers. It explains that through in-game actions you can develop each of the 5 traits and that there are multiple endings based on the decisions you make. Keep these in mind because they'll be very relevant to the gameplay going forward. Your job is as a babysitter, and the parents are leaving because they want to attend a dinner in hopes that the father will get a promotion. Their son's name is Rex. Right after the parents leave, you can instantly get started on increasing your skills. For instance, figuring you'll be able to take care of Rex easily by ordering pizza, you check the phone book for Papa Joel's Pizza, and this increases your moxie. Additionally, drinking an energy drink can up your agility. If you go into Rex's room, he jump scares you from his closet, and if you don't have your skills built up enough, you won't be able to convince him. The player calls the pizza place and their friends Hipji and Hillary. A radio DJ says that a riot broke out at an asylum and tons of inmates have escaped. The player then wanders around the house and the DJ says there will probably be power outages because of the storm. After the player makes a second call to Hillary, she'll probably show up, and once she does, the player can up their moxie. After the player hands some pizza to Rex, they're visited by a guy named Dr. Pleasant. I wonder who this could be alluding to. Pleasant informs the player that the Ding Dong Ditcher Ripper has escaped and could be heading to the house at any moment. He also informs the player that the Ripper is absolute evil while the thunder sounds off in the background, so that's how you know this is some serious shit. Once the player has enough moxie, which they should at this point, then they can tell Hillary and Hipji to hide without them questioning as to why. Around this time, the player will see a rough drawing of the Ding Dong Ditcher Ripper and afterwards find a note from Rex saying he's made the decision to hide in a crawl space. Shortly afterwards, the player will have to confront the Ripper. After what we think will be a very short fight for most players, the Ripper dies, and the player can get their friends and Rex. Once the player stands in front of the door, the Ripper will appear one last time in an attempt to kill the player, but will be shot by Pleasant, who's in the house somehow. Why didn't he just shoot the Ripper once he saw him inside the house? We don't know, maybe he just got there late. Although we did sound pretty certain the Ripper was coming to the house, so we also can't say as to why he didn't just wait. If they're alive, your friends will thank you. Sometime later, the player decides to take the pills Pleasant gave to them to help with the anxiety they've incurred. The now blood-soaked Ripper jump scares the player, and it turns out it was a hallucination. Pleasant puts the player under his own psychiatric care, but the player can't help but feel like the Ripper is after them again. However, that's just the third ending out of 3. The first ending involves the player killing their friends, and then being driven by some sort of competitive attitude to kill the Ding Dong Ditcher Ripper. Pleasant shoots the player, but doesn't kill him as the player wakes up in the asylum and finds a scalpel. They then stab Pleasant to death and are determined to be released at some point and have their legacy far surpass the original Rippers. The last ending involves the player dying enough times to where the game cuts to a newscaster reporting that there were attempted killings in the night. It then fades to a screen telling the player they were close to becoming another victim of the Ding Dong Ditcher Ripper, but you've also let your friends down, although we'd be surprised if anyone hardly considered Rex a friend. After that, the game just berates the player for sucking even more, saying they could overcome how pathetic they are, or they could stumble through life the guilt of the knowledge that they failed so hard to the point where they let their friends get slaughtered. But just to make the player want to drive the razor blade into their veins even deeper, it clarifies that ending 1 is the worst ending. It then calls the player nothing and a loser. Unironically, please stop. Let me let the AVGN chime in on this one.
You're fucking dead. And your friends, too. Beautiful. And what if there was a sequel? It would have to say something even worse. I got it. I got a good idea what it should say. It should say, you're dead, your friends are dead, Your family's dead. Your fucking pets are being skinned alive. Your mom's a fucking whore. You suck at life. The whole world hates you. You're going to hell. Live with it. Game over.
Okay, so overall, this was what the Zygotes would call a mid-experience for us. First off, let's talk about what this game seemed to present as its innovating mechanic. The skill upgrading system seems kind of unnecessary in that developing moxie, sexiness, agility, speed, and strength just come about linearly playing the game, i.e. interacting with the items around the house, the player's friends, and moving the plot forward. Want some strength? Just press the barbell for a couple of real-time seconds. Want some intelligence? Just close the windows and read the books, both of which take just a couple of real-time seconds. Want some moxie? Just keep talking to your friends and Rex, and eventually, the game will naturally guide you towards upping your moxie. I'd ask whoever implemented this mechanic and made the decisions on the way it was implemented. Since getting to a certain threshold of skill essentially unlocks certain tasks that develop the plot, so long as we assume you're coding in C++, why not script an else if function, with the condition being whether the player has completed a group of specified tasks? Granted, the player isn't going to automatically know where they should go and what they should do, but the game just guides the player to do the essential tasks because the player just tells themselves what they have to do. And bonus tasks that give the player the opportunity to go the extra mile are things gamers have to stumble upon themselves. Instead of the game flat out telling you to do certain things and let you interact with others, we'd suggest some sort of checklist for the essential skill improvement and let completionist players go the extra mile on their own. We think a counter-argument to our critique would go something along the lines of, the point-based skill system is so players can actually have the freedom to choose which route they take in terms of overall playstyle. When faced with this, we'd respond by saying, in this very short indie horror game, the conditions set by the code have guided you towards advancing the plot either way, and by the time any halfway decent player has gotten to the big fight, they've already built up the needed stats enough to where they could win. We feel as if this skill system would work much better in a much longer, open-world environment in which playstyle was a selling point of the game, and the player had much more opportunities to hone specific skills. In a game where pretty much all the gameplay takes place in a single house over the course of a night, gamers will get to the same place either way. The exact game we'd think of wouldn't exactly be Skyrim but horror, rather, we'd make it a sort of Cry of Fear style experience that feels non-linear but still builds towards a natural conclusion via giving the player multiple optional interactive paths they can go down to hone their skills. We feel as if a big part of why skill mechanics work in longer games is because players need time to hone them, and time to have fun with their builds. In games as short as Ding Dong Dead, you learn everything quickly in preparation for the boss fight, which brings us to our next major complaint about this game. The actual fight with the Ding Dong Ditcher Ripper is extremely short, anticlimactic, and boring, not to mention the fact that the way you unsheath your weapon involves a really weird mechanism. As for our latter grievance, gamers have to click on their weapon, then drag it out and hover over the outside of their inventory to be able to use it. All this while they're trying their best to charge the Ripper, who swings very fast, so the controls in this specific portion of the game are bound to throw some off initially and be a bit precarious. On top of that, if the player was quick enough to dodge the Ripper's blows, which would be hard considering all he does is blow, but the Ripper could just take a few slashes from the player's knife and go down. Considering the game built up to this bout for the entirety of its length, it should have been much longer and much harder. It's especially easier for the player if they have their strength stat boosted because they don't even need the gun. They could just land a few hits with the knife and bring the Ripper down. What kind of a fear element is there when the antagonist has the amount of health as any other generic NPC would? A crucial factor in creating a formidable antagonist is slightly giving up hope on the fact that you may be able to beat them. Developers need to make fights last long enough to where the player can just pull out a victory amidst razor's edge chances, but short enough to where the boss fight could be finished in one play session, give or take. There's also the balance of power problem if we grant a few things. As long as we assume a gamer has gotten the gun, the ammo for it, and plans on using it, the player probably won't be scared of someone who's just wielding a hammer or whatever the Ripper had. As a matter of fact, this is a common occurrence among people who play puppet combo games with a gun in them. If you watch Let's Players who feature puppet combo games on their channels, most times they obtain guns in their games. They feel so powerful to the point where they feel as if they're supposed to be chasing someone and going on the offensive. The player in total has about 5 rounds of ammunition if our memory serves us correctly, so even if the player misses a few shots due to them not aiming or the Ripper frantically running or what have you, then they can just go in with a knife if they've landed 1 or 2 shots with a gun. All in all, even for a short indie game one could play in less than a couple of hours, this didn't feel like much of a horror game boss fight. As for this game as a whole, the characters are all hilarious, so it definitely has charisma going for it, and it mixes comedy with an eerie atmosphere pretty well, but that's mostly it. 5.5 worn out doorbells out of 10.